Hi everyone, it's Evelyn, and in this week's video we're going to go over my top 10 green fillers. Now, if you don't know what a green filler is, it's not a flower. You've got your focal flowers, which is your main flower. You've got your filler flowers, which are your secondary flowers. But then, to make a bouquet really sing and feel, and also keep a sense of naturalness to it, you can add a leafy green to it of any kind. But the leafy green doesn't have to be green, because not all leafy greens are green. For example, my very first in my top 10 green fillers is I have to look over at my notes because I can't remember the name of it, is the purple-leaved sand cherry tree. Now, it has burgundy leaves, but it is still a green filler. And the fantastic thing about that tree is it blooms, or it doesn't bloom, but it starts putting out its leaves and actually its cherry blossoms at the exact same time as my camellias start to bloom in the very early spring, about mid-April. So it's just great for me, because if I simply paired my camellia blossoms, of which I have no other blossoms blooming at that time, not even daffodils or tulips, if I simply paired it with green leaves, I mean, it has its own green leaves, but it would just be pink and green and wouldn't be all that interesting. But adding in those branches from the cherry trees just makes it look phenomenal. Now, I have a very tiny flower farm and I can't be growing trees on it, so that purple-leaved sand cherry doesn't come from my property. In fact, half of my top 10 green fillers don't come from my property at all. It would be impossible for me to grow 10 top green fillers. Now, number 2 on my list, which is the one that I use right after the cherry tree, is the long-needled ponderosa pine. Now, the ponderosa pine, with its long needles, was really difficult for me to figure out how to work with in the beginning. But I have access to it, again, not on my property. So I wanted to take the time to figure out how to use it, because it's just gorgeous with those long needles on it. I mean, who doesn't love a long-needled pine? But yeah, those long-needled pines also make it extremely difficult to work into a bouquet. But I figured out how to do it in both small vase arrangements as well as in bouquets. So in small vase arrangements, what I have to do is just have it as the focal and just have it come out all the way around, and then tuck little thin filler type flowers in amongst it. So the ponderosa pine actually is the star attention. And as you can see in this particular case, I've just tucked some blooming lavender in with it, as well as some dried poppy pods and one small candy tuft blossom. And I'll tell you, that arrangement was the first to sell when I was at when I took it to the farmers market last year. I think it was the first farmers market, which would have been in May, and that one went right away. But I also figured out how to use it in bouquets, and it really does look fantastic in bouquets. The trick is to strip off a lot of the needles, and so that you can get a good long stem with it. But then use it first, and then tuck your flowers in and amongst the needles, rather than trying to fiddle to get this branch of long needles into the flowers. Do it the other way around. Use it as a center, and then tuck your flowers in and around it. And it works with any kind of flower, and it just looks stunning when it's popping out through the center of the flowers. Third on my list is the Princeton gold maple tree. Again, not on my property. But wow, what a beautiful color. Now, when it first starts coming into leaf, it's a very strong gold. As the season progresses, it gets to be a bit more of a lime green, which is kind of cool, because it, with its changing color, it gives you a slightly different way of using it. Because the leaves on the Princeton gold maple are quite big, it has to get used like the ponderosa pine. And it took me a while to figure out how to use it. But you start with one stem of it, or because when you have one stem of it, you have an open face and a back. So oftentimes I will put two together back to back, so that you have an open side facing in both directions. And then you feed your flowers in and around it, and then it just pretty much works with everything. It's another really easy to use green filler once you figure out how to use it. And the Princeton gold maple branches, they last for me through most of the summer. They are really fantastic to use. But those aren't the only green fillers that I'll use in the summer or late spring. And the next one on my list which is, what number is that? Let me see where we're at on here. Number 4. And that actually does grow on my property, and that's hostas. So hostas are interesting because they have an incredibly long vase life, even though they grow in shady areas. But when they're in a vase, or like a bouquet or vase arrangement in the sun, some of them last for a very long time, and yet they don't do well growing in the sun. So that's just a really interesting fact about them. Now, I grow a lot of different kinds of hostas, and in the spring I like to use the smaller leaved ones in vase arrangements, and they had such a nice, soft, serene feel to a small vase arrangement. But when you take the bigger hosta leaves and you add them into the bottom of a bouquet, they have this really cool flat texture. And of course, most of them, well, at least most of the ones that I have, are variegated in color. So not only do they have a flat texture, but they have a really abstract pattern to them. So they just add a little bit of difference to bouquets. And whenever they're in there, people respond very, very positively to them, as they do to the Princeton gold maple, the long-needled pine, the cherry branches, etc., etc. So I really like using them as long as I have them. The problem is they are growing in the only shady spot I have in the garden. And if we get a hot summer, I will gladly forfeit my hostas to get trampled on by the dogs, so that our 2 golden retrievers can have some shady spaces to hang out in too, because their health and happiness is far more important than me growing hostas. And besides that, by this time, I have other green fillers that I can use besides the hostas. So next up on my list, if I look at my list here, number 5 is back to a tree. But this is a tree that I do have on my property, and it's the hazelnut tree. And I really, really enjoy using the leaves of the hazelnut tree in my bouquets. I think they add another little cool texture that otherwise isn't there with their little, the way the leaves sort of do that in them. I don't know how to describe what that is. It's almost like a puffer. The biggest issue I have with my my hazelnut trees is they're really small. I grow them in pots, and I can only get a few branches off. I have 3 of them, 3 hazelnut trees, and I can only get a few branches off of each tree at this point for how small they are. So I can't use a lot of them, but the branches that I can use, I just love using. Now, clearly these pots that I've got them in are at the point where I have to pot them up, which means the trees will again grow some more. So that's kind of exciting. We'll see if I get many more branches off of them this year than I did last year, and I didn't get any branches off them the year before. Those trees, by the way, were a gift from a squirrel. A number of years ago, a squirrel went and hid a whole pile of hazelnuts on my property, and they all popped up in the spring, the ones that the squirrel missed, and I didn't know what they were at that time, but I was curious, so I potted them all up in little pots and discovered I had, I can't remember how many, I had 6. I had 6 hazelnut trees growing. I gave 3 away, and I kept 3. So that's where those trees came from. Anyway, next up on my list is number 6, and it's not a tree, and it grows prolifically on my property. It self-seeds, and that's the Breadseed Poppy. And the flowers itself I don't use because they only last for a couple of days. But those beautiful green poppy pods add such an incredible architectural detail to either a vase arrangement or a bouquet that I use. I mean, they self-seed prolifically, and I use them all. And the only reason some of them become dried and get used in dried arrangements is because there's enough of them that at some point they don't look all that great in their green state because they're starting to get more to the dried state. And then I let them go to the dried state and harvest all the ones that are dried, and then use those in the fall and the spring to add in as well. But mainly they self-seed in my dahlia beds, which is fantastic because they don't interfere with the dahlias at all. So I get just so many poppy pods, and I'm so thankful for that because I use them all. So then we're going to move on to number 7. Now number 7 is Cosmos. Now the Cosmos, and I only grow the double clicks, I do use as filler flowers, but only in September. prior to September, I deadhead all the flowers, which I find very easy to do, mainly because they're growing, where I'm growing them, there's a drop-off then. So I can actually stand on the drop-off and deadhead them at this height, which is quite nice because you can just reach in and deadhead them really fast. They deadhead so fast. But once they're deadheaded, I like those feathery, soft, moving, frothy branches to use as fillers as well. They, again, it's that textural element that they add. All green fillers, unless they're not green in color, add a really nice green to a bouquet. So what I like to look for, aside from that then, is the texture that they add to the bouquet. And Cosmos certainly add beautiful texture with their green filler status. So then we're going to move on to what everybody knows, English ivy. And just like in England, here on Vancouver Island, they love to grow up trees. They also love to grow up fences. So they grow up my neighbor's fence and push through the fence. And I don't want them growing on my property. I've managed to eradicate ivy from my property because it does take over. In fact, when we bought our property, it was just an ivy field. So I've eradicated that, but what comes through the fence, I harvest and I use in bouquets and small flower arrangements. I have to admit I don't use a lot of it because a lot of the stuff that I cut back, I don't like using in the bouquets. It just doesn't have the look that I like. But some of the stretches that I cut do, and those ones I will use. So after English ivy, number 9 is laurel. Now you may know laurel as those absolutely stunning, beautifully pruned hedges that people have. There's a laurel outside one of our fences that doesn't have that stunning, beautifully pruned look to it. It just kind of grows on its own. And it's right up against our fence, and it likes to push over the top of the fence. And I prune it back, and I use those prunings, and I love them. I think laurel is a really beautiful green filler in bouquets, so I can't get enough of it. I want more to go over my fence so that I can harvest more of it than I actually do. And I'm quite grateful to my neighbors for having that laurel there because clearly not before I started using in bouquets, before I became a flower farmer, but now I just like, yes, grow faster, faster. I need more of it. And I can't grow it on my property because my tiny urban flower farm is far too small to have laurel growing on it. So that brings me to number 10. Now number 10 is on my property again. It's not one that I've used yet, except for a couple pieces of it. And that's my Ito peonies. And I haven't used it yet because I'm going into my 4th year with the Itos, and I've been leaving the leaves, all the leaves on it to suck in as much energy as possible, for want of another word, before they die back in the late fall. I think my Ito peony leaves didn't die back until October. I want them to get as much energy as possible, to put as much energy into that root mass as possible, so that come next year I have even more flowers than I did this past year for cutting for bouquets. Which brings me to a point. They always say don't cut your Ito flowers until or any of your peony flowers until their 3rd or 4th year. But in my mind, it's okay to cut the flowers. Don't cut the leaves, because the leaves are what's taking in all that energy, not the flowers. The flowers actually take energy away from the plant. The leaves keep energy to the plant. But anyway, whether I'm right or wrong on that one, I don't know. That's just my thought process. But I love the Ito peony leaves. I love them in their green state for the shape of them. And I just love them in the fall when they each take their various shades of gold or burgundy. And yeah, that's just stunning. So those are my top 10 fillers. What are yours? Are they different? Well, they should be different because half of mine come from off property. So if you're growing green fillers on your property specifically for green fillers, chances are they will be different. So leave down in the comment section below what yours are. And if you've tried any of mine and you don't like them, and while you're down there, give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. You've heard me talking about my focal flowers and my filler flowers, and if you haven't watched either of those 2 videos, I'll put one at the top and one at the bottom right here. And click on those and enjoy those, and I'll see you next week. Bye!